Good afternoon. We're speaking to you today from the territory of Treaty 6, and I'd like to also acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta, who share a very deep connection with this land. I'm joined today by our energy critic, Kathleen Ganley, and by our economic development critic, Darren Billis. Earlier today, the federal government announced new emissions targets for Canada's various industrial sectors. I have some serious problems with what we've learned today. This is not a real plan to reduce emissions. And in fact, I would argue it obstructs the rollout of a real plan that would actually address climate change. We need serious targets, not aspirational goals. A real plan must protect Alberta workers and their families. A real plan must engage with Alberta's energy industry. Now, while the federal government met with industry, today's announcement shows that they weren't actually listening during those meetings. The new targets announced today come without any credible plan to reach those goals on schedule. There are practical, physical limits on how quickly facilities can be constructed or upgraded or projects even approved. These new targets have no awareness of these real-world issues, and the federal government would know that if they had collaborated with our energy sector in a meaningful way. Alberta's energy industry has committed to net zero by 2050, a goal that Alberta's NDP has also committed to. And we've had ongoing detailed conversations with industry about the path to this goal. Leading energy producers have already committed to reaching a 30% emission reduction by 2030. And quite honestly, given current energy prices and profitability, larger reductions might well be possible. But the fact is there needs to be collaborations around that. There need to be discussions around that, and there need to be a detailed plan around that. Currently, without massive changes in technology across every sector and huge changes in global energy demand, reaching the 2030 target in just over 7 years is more fantasy. What's more, the resources committed towards this project are just not adequate. Alberta's share of a $9 billion national commitment would be laughable if this issue wasn't so serious. Quite honestly, if that entire $9 billion was coming to Alberta, we'd still be struggling to make this work. Fact is, Albertans punch above their weight when it comes to contributing to Canadian prosperity. And we have done that for decades. Now, Alberta has to play a leading role in this international effort, and we do, however, at the same time need Ottawa to provide the kind of real resources that our industry and our workers need to allow this, to make this happen. What's even more, the overall plan creates fundamental unfairness between industrial sectors in different parts of the country. Ottawa is seeking radically different targets from different sectors that produce similar levels of emissions. For instance, today's announcement asks for 42% reductions from the oil and gas sector, which produces 26% of Canada's emissions, but only 11% reductions from transportation, which produces 25% of Canada's emissions. This is manifestly unfair, and it will have serious economic consequences for Alberta and for Canada. So why was this message not driven home in Ottawa? Well, because our Premier, the Premier of Alberta, is not spending his time making these arguments. Instead, he's spending his time defending himself from his own caucus, from various investigations, trying to sell UCP memberships, and to save his job. I heard the Premier say he went to 13 party events in the last half of last week. Well, good for him. But the fact is, that time would have been better spent speaking up for Alberta and Albertans and educating the federal government about the realities of the energy sector and the excellent work our producers are already doing to reach net zero by 2050. How can we expect anyone to take our Premier seriously on this file, or frankly any other, when he spends his time posting and defending Will Smith memes? More importantly, over the long term, he has been the most divisive and least trusted premier in Canada. And as such, he has shown himself as fundamentally incapable of engaging in the kind of constructive negotiations and determined advocacy that Albertans need to protect them. Over the past 6 months, the UCP have removed Alberta completely from this crucial debate, and today's announcement is a result. This is a complete failure of leadership from a party that is totally preoccupied with its own internal drama. Finally, I just want to be entirely clear. I am absolutely committed to a real plan that reduces emissions and that provides an effective response to climate change. Make no mistake. I absolutely understand the real urgency of that response and the need for a meaningful drop in greenhouse gas emissions here and across the world. But what we saw today from the federal government is not a real plan, and as I said, it will very possibly delay the rollout of a real plan. I will never back down. Alberta's NDP will never back down from defending Alberta families and businesses. So thank you, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Again, we'll go to questions on the phone. Just a reminder to press *9 if you're joining us on the phone, and the raise hand function if you're joining us via Zoom. If you could say your name and your outlet at the top, we'll go to our first question.
Well, hi, Catherine Gurkowski, Alberta Today. Today, the Canadian Labour Congress had testified before a federal committee saying they're not opposed to subsidies, but it needs to go towards workers, not profitable industry. But what I'm hearing from you is that both industry and workers need help in this transition. Why do you think there needs to be more money toward industry in this?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying I absolutely agree that we need to see an incredibly robust investment in supporting Alberta workers and their families as we go through the process, not only of transition, but simply changing our oil and gas industry to ensure that our product is more and more sustainable. And so we do need to do that, and it needs to be robust. And we haven't seen anything that looks anywhere close to what we need to see. But also, the fact of the matter is if we're going to be looking for these kinds of major reductions in emissions this quickly, that, very ambitious targets, the fact of the matter is even with current high profit levels, while it's very possible that those could help fund a move towards greater, more ambitious targets, the practical reality here is that we're not there. There needs to be more, and the government itself needs to be partnering on this. So I think it is, without question, a joint project, but we're asking for major change in a very short time, and I just don't think that it is possible to do it entirely without support from Ottawa. And let me be clear, Alberta's businesses, Alberta's workers, Alberta's economy has punched above its weight for many decades. We have contributed far more than our population would suggest to the overall economic health of this economy. And now when we're asking it to turn on a dime, which, fair enough, this is an issue that's been in the offing for some time, but when we're asking for this, we need to look to ensure that Ottawa has Alberta's back the same way Alberta has had Ottawa's back for so many decades.
Any follow-up, Catherine?
Yeah, and you called this target, the 42% for oil sands reduction, ambitious, and you set the industry target of 30% is achievable. Do you think that they're going too much too fast, or what do you mean when you say it's ambitious?
What I'm saying here is that, based on what we are hearing from folks in the oil and gas sector, the 42% target by 2030 is not just ambitious, it's beyond ambitious, it's a fantasy. We're not going to get there. There are practical realities in terms of how long it takes to put into place the kinds of efforts that would result in the emissions reductions that are part of that target. We know that leaders within the oil sands, not all of them, but some leaders have committed to a 30% reduction. I think it's possible we could go past that, but I think this is the kind of thing that needs to happen together. There needs to be collaboration. There needs to be a real plan with real dollar signs put beside it and real deadlines and real processes that everybody signs on to. Not a meeting that people have and then the government goes off and comes up with its own little aspirational plan and then drops it on everyone's head. That's not how this works. And so I think that we need to roll up our sleeves, everybody, political leaders in Alberta, industry leaders, and Ottawa, as well as, of course, environmental advocates, to find a practical pathway with detail that is doable and that is properly funded. We don't have that right now.
Go to our next caller.
Hello, this is David Staples from the Edmonton Journal.
Hi.
You just said that you feel that the Trudeau plan isn't just unrealistic; it's a fantasy. That it's not. Why is that? Why can't? What are the the concrete reasons that we couldn't possibly achieve this in Alberta? This kind of emissions reductions in the oil sands by 2030.
Well, again, what I'm hearing from folks in the industry is that the practical physical realities required to get to that kind of reduction, short of significantly reducing production as a whole, may mean that we can't get there. We just can't get there. When you think about how long it takes to get project approval, when you think about the debate that is still going on, the regulatory debate around pore space, for instance, in Alberta, something that the government started on last year, but they're not moving on, I would argue, because they're a little preoccupied with other things. That kind of thing, along with the fact that the simple construction of the sorts of projects and the introduction of the kind of technology that can create these outcomes take longer than whatever's left after you get through the approval process. And so that's mostly what I'm hearing from industry. And again, I want to be clear that, we know that not all industry, but leaders in industry have already said they think they can get to 30, and maybe people should be at the table looking at, can we push that a bit? But what we're also hearing, David, is that this 42 number kind of came from out of nowhere. And when you look at that fact and you combine it with the fact that and compare it to the 11% that the transportation industry is being asked to do, it says to me that there haven't been enough conversations. And there hasn't been enough rolling up of the sleeves and working out the plan, and then working of the plan.
Any follow-up, David?
Yes, the Alberta government has entered into this agreement with other provinces in favor of small modular reactors, and there's a possibility that down the road there might be some application to the oil sands with this. Stephen Guilbeault, the the climate change minister, is a long-time opponent of nuclear energy, and he's left nuclear energy out of the possibilities for funding under this new $5 billion green bond that the federal government is creating. So, there's a lot of people who think that we can't proceed, we can't get to any of these targets without nuclear energy. And I'm just wondering what the Alberta NDP's position is on nuclear energy at the federal level and for here in Alberta.
Well, I think, generally speaking, we've been of the view that nuclear energy is not without its own downsides, it is not without its own long-term waste problems, and it's not without its own significant safety problems. So what we wanted to see was a more aggressive look at other forms of lower emission energy that would get us to where we need. And so, for instance, when we look at the proposals put out by the Pathways group, we don't see them looking at or needing to rely on nuclear energy. That being said, I'm a follower of science, and I'm a person that always wants to look at the evidence, and we know technology is evolving. So I'm always going to be open to listening to objective, non-campaigny type experts who want to talk to us about these issues to see what the the possibilities are and how well they can remediate the well-known risks associated with nuclear. So I'm not saying that the door is entirely closed. I think we always have to keep an eye on how the science is evolving and how the safety is evolving. And so that is what we would do.
We'll go to our next caller.
Hi, this is Lisa Johnson from the Edmonton Journal. Thanks for taking my question. Rachel, you mentioned that the federal government's investment in helping the industry and helping workers transition isn't enough, or Alberta's portion wouldn't be enough. What would be an appropriate investment in that initiative to support workers properly in your mind?
Well, honestly, I mean, it comes down to this. I know that they are engaging in sort of conversations about what they refer to as just transition. But I will say this, ideas around, a 6 or 12-month training program for someone who's in their, late 40s, early 50s, who previously, was making 6 figures a year, that's not going to cut it. And certainly if you look at $9 billion over, and this is apparently, unless I'm mistaken, this appears to be something that's over a 7-year period, and then you look at what Alberta would normally get out of something like that, you're down to $1 billion. Well, that is not going to address the kind of labor displacement issues that we know could come from, a serious, change in the way oil and gas is produced. Now, to be fair, I think we don't know yet, because certainly if we can get to a point where we can get our emissions down but still produce the product, then of course people are still at work. But we also know that more and more, the more you bring in technology, the more people who seem to lose their jobs in the process, and that has to stop. Albertans and Alberta workers who rely on the oil and gas industry need to have some kind of certainty. And so what I will say is that $900 million over 7 years is not going to cut it. And in terms of what would, well, again, I'd rather see a lot more transparent conversation between Alberta officials and federal officials, as well as stakeholders, about the kinds of things that we're looking at. And we don't have that yet. It's still a lot of aspirational stuff. And that just creates uncertainty and worry. And that's the last thing that we need right now.
You follow, Lisa?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, you mentioned that the targets appear to be unfairly applied across different industries. I wonder why you think this is, or what this is a signal of. And if you could talk a little bit more about what you mentioned, that in order to reach these targets, the Alberta's energy industry would essentially need to curtail production. Could you go into a little bit more detail on that?
Well, so first of all I will say is that we know that the transportation industry contributes about 25% of Canada's emissions, and the oil and gas industry contributes about 25% of Canada's emissions. And so the fact that we're only looking at 11% there, and we're looking at 42% when it comes to oil and gas, obviously has a very disproportionate impact on the people of Alberta, and as opposed to, say, the folks in Ontario who are very engaged in the transportation industry, perhaps more so than we are. So I don't know exactly what's driving that disparate application, but what I do know is that we need a voice that is going to stand up for Alberta and Albertans. And, we have already done some heavy lifting. We phased off coal, and we've contributed significantly to recent reductions in emissions over the last 5, 6, 7 years in Canada, and we will do going forward. And so the fact of the matter is while we understand that oil and gas contributes significantly to emissions, we also have to remember that it contributes significantly to working people's incomes, to an overall level of prosperity across the country, to Canada's GDP, and we need we just can't be left to carry the weight of this on our own. And again, I believe that the government of Alberta has simply not been part of this conversation at all.
We'll go to our next caller.
Hello, this is François Javier from Radio Canada. I just want to be clear on, you mentioned you think there hasn't been enough consultation with industry, though the federal government is now promising consultation with the industry to create this cap on emission for oil and gas, and also funding around CCUS. So I'm wondering why you think that's not enough, as it seems there was not a lot of details purposefully because it's going to be designed with industry partners.
Well, again, I think that if there had been consultation with industry, I don't think we would have landed on 42%. I suspect we would have landed on a more reasonable reduction target than the 42%. So that's the first reason I think that there's been no consultation. I think that if there had been consultation, we would know that funding for CCUS, while welcome, needs to be a heck of a lot more than whatever Alberta's share of $9 billion would be in the longer term, but also is not likely to go into effect and play a significant role in reducing emissions over the course of the next 7 years. And so, and then finally, we don't see any detail about how the workforce within oil and gas is going to be supported through all this. And that says to me that once again, we're short on detail. And, you know, it's all great to have aspirational goals, but when you're looking at a goal that's 7 years out, you better be pairing that with some pretty detailed information. And all we have right now is $9 billion over 7 years, and Alberta as 1/10 of the country, and we can tell you that's not going to do it. And we can tell you that it doesn't sound like this has been worked out yet. So you setting targets and then figuring out how you get there after the fact seems fraught with peril.
Follow up, Francois?
Yeah, and just to clarify your view on CCUS, if you were in government right now, would you be advocating for that plan that's been being pushed by the UCP, by the industry, even by a lot of people at the federal government, of a massive tens of billion investment in CCUS as a way to reduce emissions without necessarily reducing production overall? Like, how viable do you think this is?
Well, you know, the technology and the price point and the point at which the market supports CCUS is evolving every day. And so I think that it does play a role in where we go. Is it the only answer? No, it cannot be the only answer. But will it be part of the answer? Yes, I think it will be, especially if we're looking at these kinds of really aggressive goals, which again, I think are important goals to meet. But let's be very clear. I mean, the world demand for oil right now is actually going up, not down. The federal government itself is acknowledging the need to increase our production. So if that's where we're headed, at least in the short medium term, then we need to find a way to do it where we're not putting more emissions into the environment. And so if done quickly enough, CCUS can help be part of that solution. Not the only solution, but I think it definitely can be part of it.
Do one more pass for questions. *9 if you're on the phone. Raise hand if you're joining us via Zoom. And seeing none, that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Tens of thousands of Albertans have already provided their idea for how we can build Alberta's future. You can too by going to albertasfuture.ca.